At 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the July meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission, and we'll have roll call, please.
Albrecht. Here. Buckley.
Here.
Gross.
Here.
LaBelle.
Here.
Lapp is excused. McDonald. Here. Shingles is excused. Squadrito.
Here.
Thering.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And we have a totally symmetrical arrangement, and I'm all by myself here up in the front center, but we'll go with it. All right, so let's see. Next item is approval of the agenda. So our agenda for tonight has two new business items on it, and then the other business item of the master plan. Are there any additions to or corrections to or issues with the agenda for tonight? We can have a motion to approve.
So moved. Support.
Okay, so motion by Buckley and seconded by Gross to approve tonight's agenda as submitted. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we have our agenda. Next item is minutes. We met on June 20th, so you have the June 20th minutes. And so I'll ask the same question. Are there any corrections to or additions to or issues with the June 20th minutes?
Motion to approve minutes as prepared. Support.
Okay, motion by Buckley, seconded by Gross to approve the minutes as submitted. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so our minutes are approved. Thank you. And so next item is correspondence, board reports, presentations. And the first item on that is Commissioner Thering, updates from Board of Trustees.
Thank you. I just really want to talk about one thing, and that is I don't know if you've noticed behind the hall, more towards the park area where the parking lot is, there's been a cement pad and some sidewalk coming up from the parking lot to the cement pad and then up into the Township Hall up around the corner. But the pad that is being put in, and I don't know, we talked about it, it's been a while, is going to be like a fitness court. And the court offers, I've got written down here, body weight circuit training in 7 core movements. So there'll be different stations there that you can do different things. And that I believe the equipment is scheduled around July 25th and should take about 3 days to have that portion of the project completed. And that's really what I've got.
Any questions for Commissioner Thering? Okay, thank you. Next item is Commissioner Buckley, updates from Zoning Board of Appeals.
We had a meeting last week, and it was in a meeting related to an administrative review of a decision that was made on a land division for residential construction. It was the only topic on the agenda. I would encourage everybody to watch that meeting without diving into the weeds in this particular setting here. I would encourage everybody to watch the meeting and just get a sense of, I think if you watch the meeting, you get a sense and appreciation for what some of the differences are of the ZBA and what the Planning Commission are asked to do, and some of the difficulties that are associated with some of those issues as well. So outside of that, there was a decision made that evening on the land split for the review, and I don't know if we generally get a heads up when we're going to have a meeting for the next month, but I don't think there's anything currently on the docket for the following month. So yeah, just that one agenda item.
Okay. Any questions for Commissioner Buckley? Has that meeting been posted yet on the website? Do we know?
Yes, the video's up.
Okay. All right, thanks. There's no other scheduled reports. Do any other commissioners have any items that they need to report?
One other thing I meant to say, if you were interested in that fitness court, you can go back to our September 14th, 2022 agenda packet under new business item B. A little more detail on that project, if interested.
You're referring to
The fitness court.
a trustees meeting.
Yes, the board of trustees. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so we'll go ahead and close that back up and move on. Next item is public comment. This section of the meeting is devoted to public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if anyone has a comment they wish to offer on an item that's not on tonight's agenda, they're welcome to do so at this time. We ask you to come to the podium, speak into the microphone, give us your name and address for the minutes. And this public comment is open at 7:07.
I don't have anyone online.
Okay, there's no one currently listening online. Not seeing anyone move towards the microphone, we'll assume that folks are here for other purposes. There'll be an extended public comment later in the meeting, but we'll go ahead and close this public comment right now, also at 7:07. So we're ready to move on to the new business items. There are two of them. The first one, I believe, is the first one we've had in this category perhaps, but it's a minor site plan application that's been referred by the zoning administrator. P minor SPR 23-07, and it involves landscaping at the Dunkin' Donuts Marathon gas station on the corner of Broomfield and Isabella. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rodney for an introduction, and then we'll proceed.
Well, thank you. You should have a copy of our report dated July the 10th and a copy of the as-built landscape plan in the packet. This, as you know, this is the Dunkin' Donuts Marathon gas station at Broomfield and South Isabella Roads. The project is up, it's open. During the final stages of construction, as noted in our report, the contractor, Parent Construction, who represents here tonight, made a determination that they could not actually finish the landscape plan as approved. The original landscape plan was lush, and it far exceeded the requirements of the zoning ordinance, which we noted at the time, and the applicant indicated that was a plan they wanted to move forward with. But they found it was simply not practical to actually put all that material on the site. So Parent Construction put together the plan that you have before you, which and submitted that as a minor site plan. Minor site plans are normally an administrative review process, where the zoning administrator is the approving agent for those. And Peter, as zoning administrator, does have authority to approve certain changes to an approved final site plan. The language is in the zoning ordinance. One of those is he can approve incidental changes to the landscaping. that site plan section kind of gives some examples of that, like substituting species, moving some things around if necessary. But it does not include approving a plan that significantly reduces the amount of material that's proposed from the original approved landscape plan. So the minor site plan submitted included changes to landscaping. It also included changes to the exterior lighting plan. The exterior lighting side is truly administrative. They're incidental changes. They're within the scope that Peter can approve. But he found after looking at the landscape plan that he was not able to take action on it, that it needed your review and action on that component of the project. So that's why this is coming to you in the way it's drafted. We're asking for your approval of the revised landscape plan, which would then, if you grant that, then Peter can take action on the overall minor site plan application. So as you'll note in our report dated July the 10th, we found that the revised landscape plan, as-built landscape plan, dated June 19th, does meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. There's no deficiency there. It is the amount of material is less than what was on the original approved plan, but it does more than does meet the ordinance requirements that apply. If you've been out to the site, you've seen essentially the plan on the site, so you have an idea of what you're looking at in person as well as in the plan view. But we found overall that the plan is ready for your review and action. In our report under recommendation, we did include a essentially motion language, which we simply bolded in the recommendation if you're comfortable with that. And we're happy to answer any questions as we go along.
Okay. Any immediate questions for Rodney? Okay, thanks. Okay, next item says updates from the applicant. I'm not sure which of you is representing this project. If there's anything you'd like to say to us, you're welcome to.
I'm Scott Perrin with Perrin Construction. My address is 8888 Lansing Road, Durand, Michigan. And Rodney pretty much said everything that I thought that I would say, but that we are here to hopefully receive approval for the revised landscape plan and the photometric, the lighting for the site. And the lights that we wanted to change is we had wall packs that were going to be on the exterior of the building, so we wanted to eliminate those, and then we put the can lighting in the canopies, which of course shines down at the entrances, which kind of subdues that light a little bit more. And then as far as the landscaping goes, we did get on site, and there was just so much that had to go in, and we just said that we can go ahead and put it in. I said, if we can get it in there, and I said, and then you're just going to have a problem with the maintenance on it. I said, it's just, I've never seen anything like it. And so, of course, and then of course they got detention areas, detention ponds, and of course we can't put any landscaping in those areas. So we kind of went back through, we started making some changes. Of course, I called and talked to Pete and talked to Rodney, and told them that we're going to revise the drawing, which we did. And we had come up with, from what we came up with, the ordinance is 261 required of trees, ornamental trees, shrubs. The original plan had 1,962 plantings, and we came back with 386. So we did as much what we thought we could, and it gives it room to grow all the shrubs and the plants and like that. So we're here to hopefully get approval for the changes, and I can answer any questions that you got.
Okay. Any immediate questions for the applicant? Okay. I guess I'll let you have a seat. Y'all will be here while we deliberate, so if questions come up, we can direct them to you. So you've heard from Township staff, you've heard from the applicant, you've read the memo, and you have the plan in front of you, so our job is to either is up or down on the landscape plan, and then the lighting issue will be handled administratively, correct? Okay. So it's open for discussion. I want to say it's one of the more thorough, even in its present form, I think it's a very thorough landscaping plan, and I think it will look quite nice once it's executed. It also is more detailed than we're used to seeing, I think.
I'm a guy that overplants on my half acre and then has to cut stuff out. So I don't know that, as much as I like to sit around and talk, I don't know that we need much conversation on something that still continues to meet the minimum requirement by a substantial standard. I'm comfortable with just simply moving forward with an approval of this.
Well, is that a motion?
Well, why don't I do it then, if everybody's happy with that? I'll make a motion to approve well, I'm going to spell it out, PMINOR SPR 23-07, minor site plans revised as-built landscaping plan sheets dated 6/19/2023. The Dunkin' Donuts Marathon gas station located at 4962 East Broomfield Road in the northeast quarter of Section 26 and in the B5 Highway Business District as presented.
Support.
Okay, so the motion to approve was made by Buckley with a second by Thering. Any discussion? Well, I don't want to delay this unnecessarily, and I think I've already been over this, but I want to refresh my memory. The issue of actually the level of detail that the applicant needs to supply. I went back and I looked in the zoning ordinance in section 10.2, which is general landscape requirements. It defines the type of plant material as really three types: deciduous trees, ornamental trees, and shrubs. And it's only in section 14 where it lays out the requirements for the site plan that it appears to ask for a little more detail. For example, I think I lost that page, but somewhere in there it talks about the biological and common name and so on. Is that what you're using as justification for they need to specify the species of the plant materials?
Right, the site plan section is where that information is required. And the reason it's required is because this is essentially the construction plan. The landscaping is part of the construction. And so letting us know which species are going to be installed, what sizes, is all part of that final stage.
Yeah.
The landscaping and screening section, you're right, in terms of the standards, so many ornamentals, so many shrubs and all that kind of thing, it simply refers to it that way. There are certain species that are prohibited or discouraged anyway. So there is some language in there about species.
Right.
But just as we ask for specifics on the building, just as we ask for specifics for the width of sidewalks and width of parking spaces, we ask for basic information about the types of plantings that are being installed. That's actually one of the reasons why there's a specific provision in there that gives the zoning administrator the ability to approve changes to an approved site plan that include substituting species. Sometimes that's necessary. And so during construction, there can simply be not enough of one type, say of an evergreen, and the developer can simply say, look, I can't do this one, but I can get this one, and Peter can simply give his approval of that as a simple administrative action.
Well, that's what I was getting at. So the procedure, if when they go to order the plants, they're back ordered on, red sunset maples, but they have more of the, red point maples. They can substitute if they ask, and
Yeah, so it's a simple action. It can be done very informally, simply through an email, something that goes on the record in the file that change was made.
mhm.
Yeah, it can be very simple. This one was not as simple as simply, that wording. It was not as simple because they were proposing to alter the number of plants going on the site significantly.
mhm.
So,
Okay, thank you. All right, so any other comments? So you've heard the motion. Motion is to approve. I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
McDonald,
Yes.
Waring,
Yes.
Gross,
yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Albrecht,
Yes.
Squadrito,
Yes.
LaBelle.
Yes.
Okay, all yeses, motion carries.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So the next item is a final site plan application for the Isabella County Road Commission salt storage facility. We previously approved it at the preliminary stage, so it's now back at the final stage. So once again, I will, and you have the materials in your packet and so on. So once again, I'll call forward to Rodney to just reintroduce the topic, and then we'll move forward.
Thank you. We should have a report dated July the 11th. It's about the plans that, final site plan set in the packet. As was mentioned, you saw this before. I think the big highlight for these salt barns, as you may recall, with the height, these were dome structures. We addressed the height as part of that preliminary site plan approval. The final site plan you have before you, as our report notes, is in good order. There are essentially two items to talk about. One is essentially an administrative item, a condition we would ask you to carry over, and that's related to the land division combination that's required. The site plan shows a proposed division that changes of parcel lot boundaries, and that is something that's going to be necessary to have done before a building permit is issued for the project. So we've included in your set of draft motions a recommended condition to address that, and we simply ask that you include that. The main reason why it needs to be done is because right now all of Transportation Drive, the entire right-of-way of Transportation Drive, is included with this parcel, and under our sidewalk and pathway ordinance, if that stays with this parcel, because this parcel is subject to site plan approval, it then brings the sidewalk requirements into play, requiring sidewalks that in this case would have to go down both sides of Transportation Drive. That didn't seem to be valuable to require. We talked to the applicant about that early on, and they came forward with this plan that shows breaking off that Transportation Drive into its own parcel, which really is consistent simply with the fact that it is a road right-of-way. And with that, then the sidewalk requirements will not apply to that long length there. So that's the reason for the condition. The other item that we bring to your attention is related to landscaping. You note in the plans that the applicant has made a request for approval under section 10.7, which is the modifications section. Essentially what they're asking for is for your acceptance to allow some of the existing vegetation around the perimeter of the site to satisfy the landscaping and screening requirements. It's a mixed bag as you go around the site. On the east side, which is also the boundary of the city of Mount Pleasant and the boundary with the Mount Pleasant Public Schools, that vegetation, there's some trees on that side. Largely that's kind of low quality vegetation, a lot of vines. There's a underneath all those vines is a fence that in some places you really can't see anymore. But nonetheless, it is definitely has a screening characteristic to it. On the north side, there's again some lower level vegetation and some mature trees. And then to the west of the site is largely open, but the road commission also owns the vacant lot next door between it and the existing condominiums. They have, with their previous projects, had put a berm in on that adjacent property. They're proposing to add some additional evergreen trees over there closer to the condominiums to kind of fill in. So they're essentially landscaping on the adjacent parcel rather than on the actual development parcel. But because they own both, they function together. That is something that we can prove. Some of the landscaping to the west is actually on the condo property, some of the mature evergreens. But all of it can be looked at under this modification section. If you agree, you certainly can accept that as meeting those basic screening and landscaping, the intent of our ordinance when it comes to the screening and landscaping. Our report kind of details some of the, has some of the details for what's new and what's existing. The site plan, the applicant did provide the pictures that you see oriented around the development site. And on the plan itself, then they did make reference to some of the larger trees. So you can kind of orient between the pictures and the plan as to where things are. From the staff's perspective, we're comfortable with recommending this plan to move forward. And if you do take action on the final site plan as you have it, you would be approving that modifications request that they've included in the plan. And as I said, we're comfortable with recommending this plan for approval with the condition related to the land division application being taken care of. So with that, happy to answer any questions as we go along.
Okay. Any media questions for Rodney?
Rodney?
Yep.
I didn't see mention of it. Maybe I missed it. In terms of the screening on the west side for the condos on an adjacent parcel, in the event that the road commission were to sell that parcel, is there anything, I mean, is essentially the screening then, there's no additional obligation for screening if that parcel were sold after this? You know what I mean? Like, let's say that parcel could be sold or change ownership, I guess, and then they cut trees down. Is there any obligation for either one to screen from the condominiums?
I think I'll let the applicant kind of just comment in part on their plans for that parcel. I know that their plans are that that's their buffer area. They do not want houses. That property, this area is over residential, as noted in the report. The road commission does not want houses next door to their salt bars. Mm-hmm. and so that they have used that parcel to create a buffer and to actually improve that buffer. And I suspect that the answer you'll get is that is intended to continue. There is no provision that, as things are done to tie these together, other than that would alter the conditions of the site plan approval, because the site plan approval includes that parcel and includes the improvements over there. So that would be something that would come up if the land was sold and developed for something else.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So now we'll move on and let the applicant say a few words if you'd like.
Hi, my name is Pete Lorenz Surveying and Engineering. I think Rodney pretty well covered most things. I just have a few other things I guess I would like to hit on. One piece of information, and I apologize, we didn't have this when the packets went out, but we did, we have been in communication with the Mount Pleasant Public Schools, and I think this is important or relevant because it deals with one of the property lines that we're talking about as far as screening goes. It would be the east property line. We explained to them what the project was going to consist of, what it was going to involve, and the intent to leave the existing fence in. Technically, I think that fence is owned by the school. I think it was actually installed by the school. And we explained things to them, and they are complete understanding of it. And as you can see in their letter there, they support the project, and they didn't have any concerns about leaving that property line in its current state right now with the existing screening in place. As far as the plan, the final site plan, there really weren't a lot of changes to that plan from the previous plan that was submitted. We did add quite a bit more information as far as some photographs, tried to show a little bit better what was there for existing vegetation, that type of thing. We did add some screening to fill in the gaps along that north property line. There's some additional plantings that are shown on that line. The west line is the same as what was on the preliminary plan that was submitted. I think we had came away from that meeting, at least I did, came away from, I thought everybody was pretty satisfied with what we were proposing along the west line. I know one of the comments on the review was regarding dumpsters. I have talked with the road commission a couple of different times on this. They have dumpsters on their other site, and they said they don't see where they would ever have a need for a dumpster on this site here. We did add a floor plan to the plans for the pole building, just to indicate that all is going to be open storage space. And I guess to answer the question about the adjoining property to the west, in discussions with the road commission, they have no plans for that property right now that I'm aware of. And that's about all I can tell you on that. I guess your question about if that property were to be sold, if there would be another use to come in on that piece of property that was a commercial use that would require it to be screened from the condominiums, I'm sure the same requirements are going to be on that new owner that would develop that piece of property. So I think you have the same protection now that that property is going to have to be screened if it's a similar use that requires it to be screened from that, from the condominiums. And, I guess that's all I have. I don't know if anybody has any questions or.
Questions for Mr. Lawrence? Okay, well, while we deliberate, if we have other questions, you'll be here, so. Okay, so you have heard from Rodney, you've heard from project engineer, and this project is, the final site plan is on the floor for our discussion. I thought the photos were very helpful. It was nice to be able to see pretty much exactly what the view is in relation to what's on the plan.
I have no recollection of the preliminary site plan, so I'm going to assume that I was excused, an excused absence for that meeting. But having said that, I don't see anything in the review of materials for the final site plan that gave me any significant concern.
Are the trees to the north additional? I don't remember talking about really much on the north side of the building.
They're making use of some of the existing vegetation and adding,
Right.
as Mr. Lorenz
Yeah,
mentioned.
so that's as far as the west end, I thought that was,
Yeah, the west end is the same.
Same, yeah.
It was the same as what we originally, and I think we added 5 or 6.
yeah, on the
I
north.
think Black Hill spruce along that north property
Yeah.
line.
Yeah, that's the only thing I see the additional.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, I'm satisfied.
The other thing I'd worry about is the west. It looks like you've added plenty of trees in there to buffer that side, especially in the wintertime. That's when the salt's gonna be used. And it looks like there's adequate number of evergreen trees put in to provide that buffer, so I don't have any.
In addition to the trees to the west, there is a substantial berm
Yes.
that they installed that provides some noise buffering as well as visual.
Are trucks loaded inside the barn?
Yes, most of the time.
Most
Unless
of the
it's
time.
like built to.
Right, right.
Otherwise, no, they'll be back inside.
So, yeah. That kind of takes care of any carryover of the salt.
So do I understand correctly in terms of the storm runoff provisions and the detention? It's, the required is based on a 25-year storm?
You're required to provide storage for up to the 25-year rain event, and then provide emergency overflow up to a 100-year rain event. The calculations were all submitted to George Frazier, who reviewed them at length, and we made a few tweaks here and there, and ultimately they were approved of that.
This was, I believe, the first site plan that went to our new stormwater management reviewing agent, Gordon Fraser, our township engineer.
Okay. Well, I don't, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, you know, the law is the law, and so I'm not gonna, you know, question it. I'm just trying to understand the data. It looks, if I'm reading this correctly, it says that, you could have up to a little over 2 inches in 1 hour and still maintain and not go above the allowable outflow. But that would be the duration of the storm. So if only 1 hour of 2 inches will reach capacity, then if we have, you know, 2, 3, 4, 6 hours of 2 inches an hour, we're all screwed. Is that basically the idea?
Basically, you look at, there's a couple of different methodologies for doing that. That's a modified rational method you're looking at there, where you look at a series of different storms for each, a different rain intensity for a 2-hour storm versus a 3-hour storm versus a 4-hour storm. If you were to get 2 inches an hour for an hour versus 2 inches an hour for 6 hours, those wouldn't necessarily correlate to the same frequency storm like a 25-year storm.
Right.
So it's, yes, that's just, it's a simpler method of going through for smaller sites. and
Yeah.
analyzing them.
Yeah, it was more a comment on, I mean, we just had out on the East Coast this type of thing, and they got, you know, major storms really twice in 1 week. So the concept of a 25-year storm, I think, is, it may no longer be operative, but that's not your issue. That's a much larger issue. I mean, it is your issue. It's all of our issues, but it's a much larger issue.
We do have,
This particular design on this site, though, there's enough freeboard above where the required storage is. We're required to have at least a foot of freeboard on there. We've got a little bit more on there. This particular site is small enough. It could hold a 100-year storm, being self-contained with the small elements. So we have a little bit of extra storage on it.
Yeah, the detention areas on the front facing 20 look pretty impressive, so hopefully it is. All right. Other questions, comments? Any concerns with the proposed screening? I thought it looked pretty complete, but
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. I'm going to make a motion to approve the updated PFINALS PR 23-01 final plan dated July 11th, 2023 for expansion of the essential service facilities of the Isabella County Road Commission to include development of 2 new 10,882 square foot salt storage buildings and a new 2,400 square foot pole barn building for related storage at 2100 East Transportation Drive in the southwest quarter of Section 16 and in the R-2A low density residential zoning district, finding that it can comply with applicable zoning ordinance requirements for final site plan approval, including sections 14.2.p required site plan information and 14.2.s standard for site plan approval, subject to the following findings and conditions. The Planning Commission determines that the proposed use of the mix of existing vegetation and new plantings for screening purposes is acceptable and consistent with section 10.1 modifications of landscape requirements, and 2, approval and an application for proposed land division and combination by the township assessor shall be required prior to the issuance of a building permit for the project.
Should be 10.7. I thought I said 10.1.
10.7. I stand corrected.
So a motion has been made. Is there a second?
Support.
Okay, so the motion was by Gross with a second by LaBelle. And you heard the motion. It's to approve the, actually the paperwork says preliminary, but it's to approve the final site plan with conditions. Any discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Waring,
Yes.
Albrecht,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
Squadrito,
Yes.
McDonald,
Yes.
Gross.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, that's about the longest motion I've ever heard.
A lot of pressure to get that right.
See ya.
We have had longer motions though, because we've had more conditions. All right, so those were our 2 regular business items, and so we'll move to other business, which is master plan. And so just to remind you, we've been working off a nice memo that Rodney prepared, I think back in May, and we had the updated version in June, and you have it back in your packet tonight. We are essentially going through all of it, more or less step by step. We started this last month. The first part is the framework for updating the master plan. Framework for updating the master plan. We've essentially been going through the different parts, discussing them, determining whether we're comfortable with them, if there's any changes that we want to make, anything that needs to be added, and so on. And then there's a second part, which is the policy statements from the master plan, existing master plan that we haven't gotten to yet. And then there's the questionnaire at the end. So, my proposal is just to pick up where we left off and to continue. According to the minutes, we got through Part D, Plan for Economic Development, and so we would pick up with Part E, Plan for Housing. This is on page 51 of your packet. So unless there's objection, that's what we'll go ahead and do. Now, some of you weren't here last month, so if you have comments on the earlier parts, then I would advise you to just kind of toss those in as we're discussing everything here, because we don't want anyone to not have their comments reflected. But anyway, we basically, I think for the most part, we were mostly comfortable with what was in there, but, you know, Rodney and Peter were taking notes, and so, you know, they'll be able to update accordingly as we move forward. So I'm on, like I said, I'm on page 51. This is the first section, framework for updating the master plan. And we're looking at the individual items that are printed in red. And the next item is item E, plan for housing. And there's two items that are specifically mentioned, and then opportunities, obviously, for adding additional items. First one is, plan for housing should include consideration of the needs of all township residents and households of all ages, abilities, and income levels.
Actually, we certainly talk about this part again, but actually, we were on the 2018 master plan, part E. So at page 58 of your packet.
Did we get all the way through this?
Yeah.
I know, I looked at the minutes and I thought this all looked kind of familiar. And I was like, okay. Well, if you have questions on any of the framework, then we were more productive than I was thinking. I was thinking, gee, that must have been a long discussion with them. Okay, so we got all the way through. Go ahead.
I had one thought on the very first one of B, global ends. When watching the meeting, Ryan had, there was good comments all the way. Ryan was talking about number 3, and number 3 statement is just more saying that it's included in a variety of opportunities, but it doesn't really say the importance of, not that and there has to be anything in there, but something like the township involvement is encouraged or critical to developing the fulfillment of needs for the community. More of like why we want people to get involved, instead of just saying we had a variety of ways of doing that. I don't know if that's appropriate for that, or
Certainly.
but more of letting people know why we want them to do that, not just explaining the types or the varieties of ways they can participate. If we tell them why we want them to participate, it just stuck out. I think, Phil, you used the word encouraged, and Ryan kind of started the conversation. And so I just kind of wrote that down.
Okay. Well, perhaps that's more of a procedural question rather than something that would end up in the actual master plan.
Sure.
I mean, we have to talk. We're going to be talking about stuff like that, but it strikes me as you know, you're right. How do you encourage people to pay attention to what's going on and to give their input?
That was it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So now that I've been disabused of my erroneous notion of where we were, so we discussed the framework, and so then we started in on the policy statements from the 2018 master plan, and apparently we got all the way through D, which was economic development, and so we are at item E, which is plan for housing, which is on page 58. And so again, these are goals and policy statements that were culled from the existing master plan, which doesn't have this organization, but were kind of pulled in from various parts of the existing master plan. But again, simply want to go through these and, you know, ask ourselves, are these still relevant? Are they valid? Have we already met this? Do we still need it? Do we want to expand on it? Do we not like it anymore? What have you? So the first one is, it is a goal of this plan that any new residential development be placed adjacent to existing residential or commercial development, be served by existing utilities, and be located on a paved road. So avoiding, well, in favor of infill and development from the center out, and avoiding, isolated subdivisions out in the parts of the township that we might be trying to preserve agricultural land and so on. I mean, when it says it is a goal, I mean, it's just that. It's an aspiration, it's a guideline, it's not an ordinance, so, but it's something that one could point to if a project comes in that doesn't align with this, to have skepticism, to kind of question it.
I think that rings true with what we've discussed previously already. For a variety of reasons, I don't have any concerns with that.
Okay, well, hearing no one jumping in with concerns. Next one is expand affordable housing choices and a balance of owner and renter occupied units to support multiple options for a wide range of age groups and family types. So that also is consistent with the part from the other thing, making sure there's a diversity of housing options. And the next one is the idea of cluster development in terms of the design and layout of subdivisions, keeping the houses closer together, and maximizing land that's left open for green space, recreation, and so on.
This is referencing a particular section of the State Zoning Act. It's an open space preservation development where it essentially says that they can reduce the lot size by 50% from what so if it's a 1 acre minimum, it becomes a half acre. With the idea that you're taking that additional land that you suddenly have available because you've allowed the unit on a smaller lot, and that becomes permanent preserved land. In a rural area, that might stay farmland. You might have 100 acres, and you develop lots you could normally build on 100 acres in a rural area. You do it on a smaller acreage, and you preserve 40 or 50 acres as the farm, and that's permanently preserved use of a conservation. In a more urban space, that might become a private park for the neighborhood. It's interesting that this has been in the state zoning act for a long time. It's in our ordinance. It's really not used very often. I've been surprised at how little I've seen it used.
Would that include increasing the density because of the smaller lot size as an incentive to?
The idea is the number of houses stay the same.
Okay.
You just
Lot size.
create it all on smaller lot. It works well in a more rural setting, the R1 district or the agricultural district in our ordinance, where you have a large lot area to begin with, but even if you cut it in half, you still have a reasonable lot size.
But to incentivize something like that, increasing the density would maybe incentivize the developer a little bit.
Well, that we have through the PUD. So if they want to go that way, they have a PUD option to pursue that. But the provision of the state zoning act, the incentive to the developer is essentially less infrastructure, fewer road, less road length, less utilities if there are any, and essentially being able to take that preserved land. That's still, they're not giving that land to the public. It's private land. That still has a value of its own, whether that might be whether as a private park or farming or what. It just depends on what the appropriate use is.
Would that be an example of the subdivision we have out on Crawford Road, south of, what is that?
Deerfield?
Deerfields? Yeah, is it on the east side?
Deerfield. I
Um,
think there's two of them there, isn't there?
is it like Copper Estates or something like that? Yeah. It seems like that was, I mean, I know it's small parcels that that subdivision was built on. I don't know if it's taking advantage of this type of
This is,
conservation subdivision.
this is the one with the big property behind it. This is a situation where that simply wasn't fully developed out. They did not use this provision. It sort of looks like they did because there's a large acreage that's vacant.
Yeah.
But that's actually owned by somebody who would like to develop it.
Oh,
We occasionally get
Yeah.
calls about it.
well, I don't know how you could shrink the land size on those lots any much more than they are. There's
Yeah, the zoning of those lots was, with the old R5 zoning, was actually relatively high-density zoning. They just didn't finish the project.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
But
Well-
I will say, I guess from the perspective of looking at it, it's not a bad example.
Yeah.
In terms of what the result might look like.
Right, yeah.
All right. Well, again, this is, it's an aspirational sort of thing. I think it's good to have it as an option. But I have to see if anyone decides to go that route or not. Next one is retrofitting existing homes to be accessible for seniors desiring to age in place, which could include ramps, wider doorways, first floor bedrooms, and accessible bathrooms. And where aging in place is not feasible, special facilities such as senior independent assisted living, et cetera, which we know we have. I mean, that's been one of the major developments in the community really in the last 10, 15 years has been those types of and we're not supposed to call them, that's the word they don't like is facilities, right? But communities are places to live.
I did not look in our zoning for this. I don't know if we have or want I've seen in other municipalities around the state of Michigan that there are some options, and this has been years ago that I've seen it, options for temporary housing. It's essentially, I think at the time that it was essentially easing some of the setbacks and whatnot to offer temporary housing that was not considered permanent for for the purposes of aging in place, for the purposes of allowing a parent or grandparent to live on the property in a separate, smaller housing. Are you familiar with that, or is that?
Yeah, often they call them accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law suites, various things like that. I mean, we do have provisions in our ordinance for accessory dwelling units, but it's relatively limited right now. Essentially, you have the ability, you have the option to be able to build onto your house. Essentially, turn your house into a sort of duplex by adding an accessory dwelling unit that's part of the house, not as a separate building. There's not really provision in the current ordinance for a separate building. Yes, absolutely. There are some communities where they have gone all in for building the accessory dwelling in the back. It's a separate building. It's a little bigger than a garden shed, but several hundred square feet, maybe 400 or 500 square feet, and some of them have talked about that as temporary. In reality, once it's there, it's highly unlikely to not be used. So I'm leery of the term temporary, but we absolutely could expand what we do with accessory dwelling units. The city has done more in their ordinance than that, in allowing a separate unit to be put in the property, usually the backyard. That's where we're standing right now. It's certainly something that can be explored. We can get you. There's a lot of information about this out there. I'm happy to put some things together for you to take a look at, and include in a future packet. It is a timely topic. One of the issues for us is related to water and sewer capacity. Our system is designed for a certain number of units on certain properties, and so that would become a question in terms of how many additional units we could put into certain neighborhoods or certain areas of the township without overwhelming the capacity of the existing system.
When they're on a well and septic.
Well, you have the same issue there. Typically, each unit would have its own septic. They might share the well, but they should each have their own septic system.
So it might maybe just be the ADU would require a separate well and septic system, or at least maybe a separate septic system.
Right, right. So there it really depends on whether the property has the soil capacity to provide for two systems. It's really, in that circumstance, you're really looking at 4 drain fields, 2 primaries and 2 reserves. So that's a lot of land area to with the right kind of soil. But it's certainly possible.
Okay.
I guess what I'm thinking about is, I mean, I get the idea of permanent versus temporary, but, you know, I think that when I think of the future and I think of, you know, the graying of America, you know, there's been a large boom in, you know, like micro housing that is essentially on wheels, can be pulled in, parked for a period of time and stuff, or for a period of years and then pulled away. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily address, you know, water and septic needs. But I'm just wondering if there's opportunities for it, because, I mean, for $50,000, somebody can go put a mini home on their property that's on wheels and have a very nice little place. So I just didn't know if that's something we should consider in terms of, you know, aspirational goals, that we have some accommodation for that in the future.
Absolutely can. If that's something that's important to you, I would certainly recommend that you include it. It is, as I said, it's a topic we can provide. There's a lot out there on this topic right now, so we can provide you with some very good resources.
At a minimum, I'd like to see more resources, see what some of that might look like.
And what you're talking about is like tiny homes.
Yeah, like tiny homes, yeah.
Which is just huge right now, so I think we should definitely.
I know there's a place, I happen to just be driving by, and it's built by an Amish family. They're built by Amish family, but they ship worldwide, and it's out. It would be out towards, what is it, Millbrook Township, I think, out in the middle of nowhere. I just stopped, and he walked me through all of his tiny homes, and they're impressive, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I would live in a tiny home if it was just me. So, you know, there's options for, you know, people that are still mobile, but, you know, maybe want to be near family and that sort of thing. So I think it'd be nice to consider at least accommodating those sorts of things in the future.
Yeah, I agree, because I just feel like a lot of people are under the impression too that they can just do that without
Without guidance.
yeah, and because I don't think a lot of people are realizing that that's not necessarily the case. So with it being such a huge thing right now, even younger people, you know, I have kids that are young adults, and they talk about it constantly, and, you know, it's an affordable way to get started when the housing market isn't friendly right now to people who are just starting out. So yeah, I think we definitely need to look into that.
Yeah.
Okay. Other points on that topic? Okay, then the next one. Because of the township's proximity to Central Michigan University, it will continue to see a demand for student housing. The township seeks to strike a careful balance between serving the market and protecting the character of the community. The Bluegrass area remains the best location for new housing catered to students.
I mean, I don't disagree that that's probably the best area for new housing, but I'm wondering if Commissioner LaBelle could speak to the average occupancy at this rate. I don't know if we'll see a great demand for expanded student housing anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a demand for it right now.
Yeah.
Maybe, hopefully 10 or 15 years from now. Sooner would be best. I don't see that happening.
If you feel this is not something that, I guess we talked last time, if this is not something that grabs you and says this is a must to carry forward in the plan, you just simply say it doesn't apply anymore, and then take it out.
Well, I mean, I think it may not apply like as we speak today, but I think it's still worth, you know, having that as a goal, that if there is a need for that, then you know, keep an eye out for that.
I mean, I like the idea of making the statement that we continue to believe that that remains clustered in that bluegrass sector.
But what if we since you took out the first sentence and said the township seeks to strike a careful balance between serving the student housing market, we'll have those words there, and protecting the character of the community, and then the bluegrass area remains. Would that?
Yeah, I'd be okay
Yeah.
with it.
That sounds good. Yeah.
How would that work then if somebody wanted to have another student housing development right now and there's not because it's not an ordinance, but it's more of a suggestion?
Well, this is simply acknowledging that we are university town. I think is largely what this is saying. Now, we're eliminating the statement that there's a demand right now, because I just said there's not. We're overbuilt for student housing simply because the university's student population has dropped so far. That's beginning to change, which is a good thing. But in terms of the ordinance, it's simply multiple family housing. We don't call out a separate category for student housing. So anywhere where multiple family housing is allowed, they can build student apartments. Or frankly, as long as they meet the standards that apply, duplexes or anything else can be used for student housing. It just has to meet the occupancy requirement.
Any other comments on that one? Okay. The next one, multiple family or attached single-family structures should incorporate architectural design elements that emulate single-family neighborhoods, such as pitched roof lines and prominent entries, and minimize appearance of garage doors. Site should provide pedestrian connections between building entrances, public pathway connections, and parking areas. Important site design features include waste receptacle screening, parking lot landscaping, bike storage. To what extent are those already addressed in the zoning ordinance?
I think probably that if there's a weak area, it's within the architectural design element. We do have some basic standards that, you know, we added to the zoning ordinance, but that was really on the commercial side.
Mhm.
The other requirements for bike parking and sidewalk connections, and that's certainly that's addressed in the ordinance.
Okay. I laugh when I read this because, and I will freely admit that I live in one, but, and my house is almost 40 years old, but the, even like the new homes that when they have a big ad in the paper and they have several, you know, brand new homes, the last one I looked at least two of them, I describe it as it's a garage with a house attached. And mine is like that too. Big garage, and then the house is kind of off to the side. So this is, I guess my point is, this has not been a universally followed principle in the design of homes in this area. So maybe a tough sell in the long run.
Well, there's been a few factors. We've gone through this with the city. Well, it's probably been 4 years now. Their model of wanting the garage to be set 20, 40, 60 feet back of the house, kind of in some of these older neighborhoods. And the new one is more up closer because of the footprint of being able to have less concrete, more concrete, cuts down the cost. Plus, most people want an attached garage versus a detached garage, or it's set back farther from the thing. Some people don't really like the looks of that garage, like you said, but that is what everybody is building. Most mainstream places are building that. There are, Livier's built a couple in Cornerstone where it's got the side where, so it all looks like the house with the materials and all that, but they just cost more to do that.
Yeah. You make an excellent point. it's probably to minimize the amount of concrete you need as much as anything.
Yeah, it's just really condensing that footprint to cost less.
Yeah.
So the price is rising, it's just costing more. That's one way to offset some of that, although Olivieri's been doing it well before the pandemic, so it's just kind of the more sought after floor plan that he's been building.
Mm-hmm.
The main benefit to moving the garage off the front facade is create more of a walkable neighborhood. You create an opportunity for a real front porch. You create the opportunity for people to actually talk to one another in a walkable space. Now, that also means you need sidewalks and you need relatively small lots. If you have third acre or half acre lots, there's no value in that. So the lots are too big really to have that sense of walkability and meeting your neighbors. But when the garage is in the front, it tends to shove the porch back, and so you have that disconnect to people that might actually be walking by on the front sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
You also have less eyes on that street out front. The house is oriented interior or to the rear, and so you're not really paying attention to what's going on in the neighborhood around you.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. It is absolutely, that is the common style. It's the big garage out front. And I certainly would not want to create an ordinance that mandated that it had to be a different way. But from the perspective of the master plan, from the perspective of preference in terms of character, talking about neighborhood character and such, that could be something to include. The question really is what you want to have in future neighborhoods in the community. We certainly have we know what we have. And we have a variety of neighborhoods, older ones, smaller houses, newer ones, larger homes, larger lots. And really the question is what do you feel is a high priority for the future in terms of character? And that then should be reflected in this section in terms of design elements.
I mean, this is focused, well, I guess, multiple family or attached single family structures. This isn't focused purely on single family dwellings. I like the idea. I don't want to be overly prescriptive about what things should look like. I like the idea of having something that we emulate, because even though I don't think it's going to happen in the next 5 years, I think as the snake swallows the boomer generation, so to speak, and we get into the smaller generations, I think we will see the house size shrinking too. So it's nice to have some aspirational traits, I suppose, that we're looking out towards the future.
This is another area where I have some interesting elements I can share with you. The Michigan Municipal League and Michigan Association of Planning combined to put together essentially a design book on housing types, and what it was intended to do was to illustrate what's possible in terms of a modern home character, in terms of what's in the modern home both on smaller lots, but also, like I said, in creating more walkable, people-friendly neighborhoods. They actually, in doing that, they went back to the past with some of these designs. They were including things like showing how you can do a duplex that looks like a single-family home. It doesn't feel like two garages, 2 doors, and 2 driveways, but nonetheless, it's a duplex that allows a family to live there and have rental income, or a family to live there and the parents live next door, those kinds of things. Actually, it's a really nice guidebook. I can certainly share the link with you, take a look at it. There's a lot of information in it, but it might give you some ideas in terms of just some things to think about, if you're interested.
I'd be interested. It's funny, I mean, I have heard a number of reports about the death of the front porch, America's front porch, and those are interesting to listen to. I was just listening to the news on the way home tonight, on the way home from work, and the guy in the news was quoting a stat about occupancies, and they call them, people that live alone, they call them, what do they call them? There's a new category. It's like singular or singulars or something like that. But the number of people who live alone in the past, it's either 20 or 30 years, the number of people who live alone over the past 2 or 3 decades has gone from 8% in the United States to 30% now. And so I just can't imagine if that trend continues. I can't imagine, and it talks about like people getting married later, if they get married at all, having fewer kids, that sort of thing. But it was, if that trend were to continue, I just can't imagine our housing size is not changing as well. Our housing layouts and sizes not starting to respond to that as well. So it'd be interesting to see that stuff.
Okay. And now that I am listening to the discussion and reading this whole statement, multiple family or attached single family, that means a condo or a duplex or something like that, right? We're not even talking about truly single family homes anyway, so.
But it is, I think this is a valuable conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
On the single-family side.
Yeah, and I think that having, this type of aspirational statement probably makes sense. All right, the next one, home stewardship should be supported broadly beyond owner-occupied residences to include rental home and apartment maintenance.
What do we mean when we're saying that? I don't know what we mean when we say home stewardship. Is that just maintaining the appearance of the exterior appearance of the home?
I think this is, you deal with a number of these kind of blight issues. Would that be kind of along this line from your perspective?
Yeah.
That's how I interpret that.
I mean, we could even expand this to talk about, again, neighborhoods. Really, stewardship is the idea of how you care for a place. It might even, want to say it is, instead of home stewardship, it might be neighborhood stewardship.
So I think about it as a guy that owns a rental. I think about, well, what does that mean for a rental home or apartment maintenance? Is that, is that essentially, when I first read it, I thought about like a subdivision, a covenant, saying, if you have a covenant, that's not township ordinance necessarily, but it's, hey, we got this neighborhood and there's a covenant that says you don't build this type of shed, or you don't do this or that, or you don't have dogs chained up outdoors, or that sort of thing. I mean, is that kind of what we're talking about here, is having that type of kind of maintenance or stewardship or exterior appearance or something, or are we?
Well, I think largely in this case, it's really about maintenance. It's about
Just
the care and appearance of that property.
Okay.
That has no bearing on income or anything like that. You can be meticulous in caring for property and be very low income. You could be slovenly and caring for property and be very wealthy. I mean, but I think that's really what stewardship is about. It's the idea of how do you care for the place that you live in. But this is also a statement that I think we can say is unclear. So my suggestion is that if that's important to you, I would probably want to word it a different way so it's clear.
Because it specifically mentions rental homes and apartments, I assume at least some of the motivation for this would be student rentals, making sure they're kept up and the appearances are kept up and so on.
Avoid couches in the front yard and the other.
Yeah.
So does that ultimately translate to code enforcement, essentially? Is that?
Well, when people don't have when they're not good stewards, yes, that's what happens, is Peter gets involved and notices violation go out, and tickets are issued and all that sort of thing.
So essentially, if we're saying something like this in the master planning, what we're saying is that would guide our ordinance language in that area in the future, that we're prioritizing, well, I guess it's probably not fair to call it blight, but we're prioritizing the avoidance of blight in these types of areas.
But if it's like maintenance, it's like, okay, well, we as a township maybe want a landlord to mow that grass once a week. And right now, to save costs, he's only doing it once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or call it once a month, something that's more drastic.
Right.
I mean, it's open that, interpretation that could be just maintenance, that could be something too. Well, you need to trim your bushes. Well, I'm trimming them every 3 months. well, we need you to trim them every month. I guess where do you draw the line with enforcing? I think the blight thing makes more sense. Now, enforcing a maintenance schedule, that's, granted, if they're 3 feet tall, that's different. But
Well, and I know the city has, because my rental is in the city, and so the city just has, like, when it comes to grass or weeds, it's anything over, I believe it's 9 inches. I mean, one weed in the middle of the yard is, but if there's a consistency of
Yeah.
lawn growth, 9 inches, and this time of year right now with the plantains growing like crazy, I'll tell you, you're mowing 2-3 times a week. But yeah, no, I think it's important to have something like this. I think that we probably should be always keeping an eye on our ordinance or our code and saying, because you're right, I mean, I can trim a shrub to look like a big ball, or it can just grow naturally, and I don't know that the township should be telling somebody when they have to prune their shrubs, but I don't know.
well, and then you had no mow May. So I didn't even know about this till I saw a sign in somebody's yard, because I'm like, why are their grass and weeds like 2 feet tall?
I hadn't even
Well,
heard
it was
that.
first week of June, and it was no mow May with a sign in the yard. It was in Union Township. I
It's
mean,
to promote pollination and
Oh.
pollinators, to
Yeah.
have a place to,
Yes, that's
yeah,
it, that was it.
to
So,
land
I mean, how do
and
you-
rest and eat.
I mean, so I mean, I don't think we enforce maybe something like that, but the blight thing, I think what really comes up is some of the people that have come in and discussed the blight issues, whether it's on, right here on Pickard Road, there's been some down here that have, neighboring properties I've mentioned about neighboring properties, and the old pool area there at the end of Bill Rail. I mean, is that meant for more situations like that, or for just general maintenance, or both?
Again, these are your statements, so if it's not clear, first of all, I would recommend we not include it, but if there's a better way to put it, or something you feel is important, absolutely important, to include in the master plan, then we obviously can change it to that.
Again, and I don't mind that it's in there, I guess I'm just looking for maybe some clarification on maybe the intent.
I think this, part of this conversation probably would be better in connection with a review of, what our blight ordinance looks like and whether or not that's satisfactory, or whether we should be, considering anything else there. But yeah, I agree. I think we should have, for master planning purposes, I think we should have something that speaks to, hey, if we want to keep a clean and tidy neighborhood, that's a understandable, expected goal, so.
Stewardship is a pretty soft way to say that.
Yeah. Actually, the use of the word stewardship and the use of supported as broadly as opposed to, enforced, or however you want to rephrase it, caused me to think of another dimension of this, which is probably more applicable in the city, but it could be applicable in the township, which is, municipalities have these plans where you can apply for assistance with, home renovations, especially exterior stuff, whether through grants or whether the municipality sets aside. Doesn't Mount Pleasant have that? I mean, I see where they give awards to homes that,
Oh, if you make
beautified themselves,
yeah.
but I don't know if they get financial assistance for doing that, or they just get a plaque. But I know there are municipalities that have programs for, for getting rid of, helping people avoid blight and improving the appearance of their homes and that sort of thing. So.
One thing that might be, and you just prompted it in my head, but when it says broadly supported, home stewardship should be broadly supported. One of the things, I was up north, we got a place in Central Lake Township that's right next to Bel Air, over the 4th, and they had a township-wide, 1 day a year, where you can bring out anything you have, any garbage you want to get rid of. You put it at the end of your drive, and the municipality is paying to clean it up and take care of it. And I would see something like that in regards to keeping clean and tidy kind of neighborhoods and communities. I would see statements like that as being something that the township could at least consider as being, what are ways in which the township can help people avoid blight? And by that, what are ways, well, we do an annual recycling electronics, I always put it on my calendar in October, so stuff like that, like, because that's all part of that process too, so.
Yeah, I've been there, we've had trailer loads of mattresses
Yeah.
and chairs and couches and
Yeah.
garbage and electronics, and last year they did paper shredding. They had somebody that was there, and you could watch your paper get dumped in and shredded up, and that's a,
Yeah.
I think maybe the best way to think about it is kind of a cooperation between municipality and the homeowners, you know, and with this supported broadly statement, like you're saying. I don't think we should look at it as one way of like enforcing or expectations of homeowners, but also thinking of it as making it easy for homeowners or potential homeowners to take care of some of the things that are notoriously difficult, like constantly on like the social media sites for Mount Pleasant, this and that. Almost every day there's a comment or a question about a dump. And so people are actively looking to where to take things, and they don't have it. So
Yeah.
I think we just need to think of it more as like concerted effort between homeowners and the municipality. Maybe we could figure out a way to rewrite it to express that.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit.
Provide opportunities.
Right. What,
Give
like,
the information, yeah.
yeah, what can the resident do to keep their property clean and tidy, but what can the township do to assist? I think
Right.
it's always good. I know the city, because I jump on it occasionally, the city once a year will allow you to take all your, like if you have dead trees or that sort of thing, and you pull your branches, your, you know, trees, whatever, anything that's down, you can pull it to the side of the yard and they'll come through and chip it and haul it away for you and stuff. So all of those things cost money. I just think that it would be nice to have a statement in there that at least keeps the township thinking about aspirationally what can the township do for its residents as well. So, and obviously it's not everything, but there may be some things.
Okay. And then the last item under housing is evaluate residential and select business districts to allow a wider variety of attached housing types. And that, of course, ultimately is a zoning issue. But we've sort of done that to an extent. Maybe we have more flexibility because of the PUD option.
So where there's a master plan element is as we're talking about the future land use map, and where various activities are designated. What we say specifically about high density, multiple family residential, or what the various categories we choose, this is really where we'd be talking about this topic. And so it's just, as you're looking at the master plan, I think it'd be valuable to look at how can we build in more mixed use kind of residential, commercial type districts, or just have a broader variety of activities together.
Okay. Any other comments on housing? Okay, then the next item is item F, Plan for Agricultural and Preservation of Rural Character. These are short statements. Preserve areas suitable for farming and agriculture-related uses. And we've kind of been saying all along that we want to do that. The second one is more of a declarative statement, but the township has adopted priority development areas to ensure the preservation of active farmland. I mean, I take that as tied to the whole, you know, the future land use and where we put stuff and where we think we want to put stuff. So in that sense, I think it's probably already dealt with elsewhere, or at least it could be merged with that. Then we have ensure that lot sizes in agricultural zoning districts are large enough, for example, 5 or 10 acres, to prevent fragmentation of identified priority agricultural areas.
I like all of the statements in this section. I tend to think, I like the idea of, I mean, personally, I would be happy to strike the 5 and say 10 acres or more. 5 acres is fairly small plots, and if we're trying to avoid fragmentation. And I mean, I know there's townships around the state of Michigan that are like 40 acres or something to, you know, that are intended to preserve that agricultural district. For the agricultural districts that we have left, I would not be against a 10-acre requirement.
There's an interesting option that we can pursue. I agree. The larger the minimum lot size, the less fragmentation. One interesting thing that is done, especially when minimum lot sizes are even larger, 40 acres or something like that, is to include a provision that allows a very limited number of splits of a small lot, maybe 1 or 2 acres, that essentially creates opportunities for the multiple generations. Maybe as the parents are aging, the children are taking over the farm, so the parents, they divide off a 2-acre lot where they can have a garden and such, and they can be there, maybe they can help out, but they're no longer on the large parcel. So that is something we can consider. It's a way of allowing some divisions while still making it as a very high priority preservation of these large parcels.
I mean, I would like to see what type of information that, you know, like see what language like that might look like. I went through a process with my dad. He had maybe 120 acres, and it was some inherited, some purchased land, but there were 4 or 5 parcels, and we went through a whole process of having to join parcels and then divide them again, so you could divide them appropriately, and then split out a house off from the parcel and everything. And that wasn't a township that required a 40-acre minimum. So I don't know how much we cover that, you know, here in Union, but I would like to see some clarity on that and make sure that we are working to preserve that. So I'd like to see if we have some examples or models that we could look at.
I have a question on number 2. I read that as we've already done that, so do we want it to be like that, or do you want to put in there that like we're continuing to adopt priority development areas? Or am I misunderstanding that?
No, I think that makes sense.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind is that if this kind of a statement ends up reflected in the new master plan, that new master plan is adopted. That's why it says what it says.
Okay.
In this plan, you might say, maybe those are the words that are missing here. In this master plan, Township is adopted.
Got you, okay.
Mm-hmm. I do like the number 5, support accessibility to local food. That loops back into support for things like agritourism and stuff like that. So I like that element of it.
Yeah. Does anybody have any issues with any of these in their current form? Or have any that they want to add?
There's nothing that local townships do. I mean, state and federal has programs in terms of conservation programs and that sort of thing, but townships don't really get into any kind of programming that would be conservation-based for farmland or vacant land or anything like that, do they?
We could. There are some townships that have a farmland preservation ordinance and have a process. Typically, with any kind of farmland preservation, the best permanent method for that is a conservation easement that's on the property. In order to have a conservation easement, you have to have somebody that holds that easement, and that holder is responsible for making sure that the property is maintained in accordance with the easement. So that's why we see a lot of nonprofit land conservancies. That's what they do, is they hold these easements and go out typically once a year and look to make sure things are still the way they should be. Double check, make sure the land's not been divided, that sort of thing. So this is a stewardship again. In this case, the land conservancy, the holder of the easement, essentially becomes a steward over that land, along with the landowner. So a township can be a holder of a conservation easement. That's not as common, but it certainly can be, and some have done that through an ordinance process. The counties are more common in doing that because it's typically easier to pass a county-wide village to fund that kind of thing in a rural community. Because you would need to fund it. I mean, like I said, those land conservancies rely on donations or other income streams to fund the staff and resources they need to be able to actually be stewards over the sites they hold easements for. Township would have the same situation.
Okay. So let's move on. We've got, next item is plan for natural resources and the environment. First one is protect significant sensitive natural amenities such as water bodies, wetlands, mature trees, and natural ecosystems. And 2 goes kind of right along with it. Alteration to natural features should be carefully considered to minimize impacts and ensure mitigation where necessary to maintain the natural balance so as to avoid altering the system and contributing to increased erosion, sedimentation, decreased groundwater recharge, and increased surface runoff to the township's various lakes and streams. Then we have one dealing with the importance of wetland areas and the need to protect them.
This sounds easy. Of course, protect wetlands. Of course, protect natural features. The challenge is when somebody wants to develop land that has these things on it, woodlands, other things. What do you protect? What do you allow to be altered, developed? And we do have cases here in the township where areas were developed. I think in some cases it was not great farmland, and so it was developed as something else. But it was done near, for example, county drains. We have a neighborhood where there are county drains bracketing the neighborhood. And so when there are major storm events, that's the first area to flood. That's an area that, as agricultural land or as open space, it was fine. It could flood, it'd be fine, but build houses in it, and all of a sudden you have a major catastrophe when it floods. So that it is a real challenge to try to balance interests, because if we are strict in the area of trying to protect these natural ecosystems, waterways, wetlands, all that kind of thing. We are going to run afoul of folks that think that we're inhibiting the ability to make use of their land for more intensive development activity. This is a constant push and pull back and forth in this area.
I feel like you're talking about my subdivision.
I'm not, but I don't disagree with you though.
Yeah.
No, I'm thinking actually just up the road, McDonald Drive up here.
No, sure.
Mm.
I mean, I personally think it's important, and I think that, I mean, at some point, I think we had discussed something maybe related previously, that, you know, at some point, townships and developers start to decide at what point they stop building outward and start building upward. But I have no problems with including, you know, these types of, you know, at least having some statements that include natural resource and environmental protection. So they're not making any more land.
It is something to consider, and then maybe as we're looking at the master plan, we do look at can we do more in areas that are intended for development. You know, so we'll have to be looking at the sewer system, but that could be upgraded as well if the best approach long term is to increase density in areas closer in. Then maybe we need to look at planning for the future of that system to be able to support that, to preserve the areas farther out.
Well, and on the flip side, can we look at, in terms of a future land use map, can we look at areas of discouragement in terms of wetlands and stuff like that, and have that at least indicated as such, that this is targeted for preservation? So at least that's out there and documented, and maybe we do some of that already, I'm not sure. But
We do have, this is certainly, if you look at the maps from the 2018 plans, it's the 2017 kind of existing conditions document that Peter shared with you a while back. It's on the website, I think it posted as well, but that has some various natural features maps, and we certainly have access to updated versions of those. The state does a nice job of preparing some of those, and so we could look at maybe how those interact and maybe identifying properties that should be simply left as rural open space.
Okay. Next one is low impact design. Encouraged to reduce the level of stormwater runoff. Actually, 4 and 5 are kind of along, I guess, similar lines. We talked earlier about the cluster development. What is downspout disconnection? Meaning it doesn't go into the sewer system?
Right. We actually have a problem with that right across the way over here in Cornerstone Estates. There's been quite a number of homes where both the sump pumps, but also in some cases gutter drains had been connected into the roadside drainage. There's basically an under drain along the other side of most of the internal streets in Cornerstone Estates that was not intended to take input from anything other than basically the infiltration from the dirt areas right by the road. It's a fairly minimal drainage system put in by the road commission, but people have connected into it with sump pumps and other things, and have created huge issues with flooding and such over there as a result. So, none of it was intentional. They didn't understand that system was not designed for what they thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's also no approval process for connecting a sump pump drain into a system like that. But usually you see this in older communities. Mount Pleasant may be one that has problems with that, but I know, for example, Ann Arbor was a huge issue 10, 15 years ago. I think in most cases now that's all been fixed, but
Mhm.
it just overwhelms the storm sewer system.
Mhm. Okay. I remember why the next one is, well, one reason the next one is in here is because I think around the time we were doing that master plan was when they first were tracing the problems with the Chippewa back to the septic systems out in the western part of the county. And so there was, I remember some discussions about the need for more frequent inspections and that sort of thing, so.
And is it still true that there's no statewide law that requires septic inspection at the point of sale?
That's correct. Yeah, there is, I think, actually a bill that's floating around Lansing on that topic. I haven't heard anything about what's happened with it, but the current state legislature is interested in this topic and establish a statewide requirement.
And we don't have a requirement in Union?
It's required in Isabella County.
Oh, it is required in Isabella
Isn't it
County.
the health department?
Yep.
Is
If
Okay.
we're gonna sell your home and you have well and septic, it has to be inspected, pumped, and passed prior to closing.
Okay.
And
So,
you're building the burn.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just gotta make sure if it doesn't, then it needs to be rectified prior to sale. You can escrow funds to do that.
yeah.
Um,
So was there a push to increase inspection frequency beyond that, or was it, because I remember, it seems like it's been 5 or 6 years ago now, we were having that conversation, and it seemed like,
Well, I think this rule, and then this rule requirement, I'm not sure the exact terminology of it, but I think it was like early 2018, if I recall.
oh, so it's fairly recent as well?
Yeah, it's only been 5 years.
Okay, so maybe I was hearing about it as they were kind of trying to address it countywide.
But, other surrounding counties, I mean, it's not required there.
Right, right.
I've heard Gratiot's considering it, but I've heard that for a couple of years, same with Clare. But we're the only one that's required at this time, that I know of.
And county applies to, that doesn't apply just to the surrounding townships, that applies to the city as well, correct?
Everything in Isabella County.
Everything, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And then the last one, require vegetated buffers from all wetlands, streams, lakes, and rivers. So any other comments on that section, that whole plan for natural resources and the environment? Okay, under plan for energy, there isn't anything, but there is some stuff in the newer part, right? Explore renewable, the options for renewable energy in residential areas and that sort of thing, but apparently in the existing plan, there's not a whole lot.
And well, I guess, I can't remember when we had our conversation about energy, did we talk about, I guess I think about, and maybe we did talk about it at the time, but I think about things that, not just what the homeowner can do on their existing property according to ordinance, but what the township can do to support renewable energy. And I may have mentioned, there are some programs that you hear about and stuff where, similar to a special assessment, somebody can tap into low interest financing for renewable projects on their property, and then that is assessed in taxes, and the debt remains with the property, that sort of thing. Have we talked about any of that, or am I just?
Yeah, and this is really at the policy level, so it's certainly a policy statement to encourage more private investment in renewable energy projects would be a fine statement. But that's really getting well into the implementation area.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking about in terms of a statement is just having a statement that says something to the effect of, the township exploring opportunities at a township level to promote renewable energy options. That was just one example that I was given in terms of those types of assessments and stuff like that. But I don't know if there's anything else. I don't know what townships can and cannot do. So I think it's maybe an exploratory conversation.
In terms of what we can do, the primary mechanism that we have here is our zoning ordinance, and what we allow, what we don't allow, where we allow it. Because it's a land use element.
Yeah.
Renewable energy systems are often essentially land use. So we can be broader, we can be more restrictive in that area. In terms of its incentives, the township has a pretty limited role to play. Sometimes there's money available that we can, since you get some grant money that we might be able to turn around and re-grant out for certain types of projects. But that's a whole level of activity that I think currently the township we don't have the staffing resources to do. The one area that's a little different is in our DDA districts, and in that area, because of the nature of the downtown development authorities and the funding and the types of projects, infrastructure projects that those DDAs are designed to help promote. They certainly can get into that area, including to some extent even in helping to support certain types of improvements as we've done. We have our DDA districts have a grant program that provides some money to help out with things like updating older signs in the business quarters. And we have one project that's just completed with Mid-Valley thing. I wanted to say Mid-State, Mid-Valley structures over here on Pickard Road. So the DDA districts have some ability to do that because they're more of closer to the business community, whereas the government with public funds or general fund, we're far more restricted in how we can use that money.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the programs I'm thinking about that I've heard about are, it's not a grant, it would be an assessment to provide financing to a residential homeowner for certain types of like renewable improvements, but it would be assessed and paid back at a rate of interest to the township. But maybe those types of programs are just simply too far out in the future or too big for a township of our size too. It's just something I've heard of.
I wonder, it's not something I'm aware of right now that we can do here. There are some states where you can.
Yeah.
But I suspect we don't have the state legislation to support that here.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything else on energy? Community facilities and infrastructure plan is pretty short. Coordinate utility expansion in a way that encourages development along existing arterial roadways and on vacant or underutilized sites first. I know the master plan has the map of existing utilities, and we've looked at that and kind of paid attention to those ideas in the past. So I'm assuming we would continue to do so. Anything else on that? So the last section of the policy statements from the 2018 master plan is J, transportation, or the last one where there's stuff, is J, transportation plan. And there's two parts to it. There's roads and streets, and then there's non-motorized, but there's these 4 bullets, which are the kind of preamble to that.
Phil, I'm going to at least be true to myself. I'm going to point out that we are at about 9 o'clock, so if we're looking for stopping points along the way, Just making sure that I'm pointing out the time for everybody involved here, so.
Yeah.
If we're looking for anything here.
Yeah, I've been watching the clock too. Well, the
Yeah.
question then would be, do you want to stop there, here, and still have a piece of this next, or do you want to try to get through this and then just have the survey left? And it's the will of the planning commission.
I vote for stopping now.
I agree.
My brain's starting to get a little
Yeah.
fried anyway.
Yep.
6 a.m. comes early for me, so.
Okay, so we will mark that we stopped through, we got through I, and we will start with item J on this next time, which means we'll look at this, and unless we have a very busy agenda, we will also go through at least begin to go through the survey.
Now, just one suggestion I would make on the survey side. We have, the Board of Trustees is going to be looking at a proposal to work with the same folks from CMU that helped us out before with the last two surveys in 2009, 2016. I don't have a date yet when that proposal is going to be in, but we have been working with them. They've been very kind to have some conversations about the survey, what it might look like, and how we might do it. Just in case the timing, because the idea of the timing was we were looking at doing the survey in September or maybe early October at the latest, because we want to have it out when the students are back and after the summer vacations are all over with. So timing-wise, I just don't want to run in a situation where your comments don't get reflected if we need to get this survey done before, sort of pinned down before our next meeting. This is my suggestion. Take a look at the 2016 survey. If there's something you feel it's important to consider about it, just send me an email individually. Or if you want to take the survey and you can do as I've actually had a couple of people do and scribble on it and just drop it off to my attention, that would be fine too. The changes you feel might be beneficial. That way, like I said, your individual comments will be reflected if we need to move forward before our next meeting.
Since not everyone is here, could I request that an email be sent to the entire commission to that effect?
We can certainly take care of that. And we'll send out another copy of the survey as a separate file.
Okay. All right. So we will stop there, and so then we will move to extended public comment. So this is the position or the portion of the meeting where individuals are invited to address the planning commission on any item, whether it was on tonight's agenda or not. We ask you to give us your name and address for the minutes and limit your comments on any item to 5 minutes. Extended public comments open at 8:58.
There's no one in the.
And we don't have anyone online, and we don't have our audience, so we'll go ahead and close that back up. And the last item is final board comment. I don't have a comment, but I have a question. So last month, I noticed for the first time, because I'm usually watching the road because I'm closing in on an intersection, I noticed that there's an abandoned house right over here in this cluster of houses on Lincoln, on the east side of Lincoln, just south of here. By all appearances, it's abandoned. The grass was so high that someone has mowed it, but the driveway's all grown. What happens then? Does the township follow up on those, or what happens?
Are we talking about literally just down?
Yeah. About 3 houses down from the corner.
That's when, it's not abandoned. It simply was not being maintained. They did in fact mow it just recently, and still not completely in compliance with our ordinance. But it's not abandoned. It was just.
But no one's living in it. or it doesn't look like it's occupied. I mean, I don't see it at night when the lights are on, but like stuff is really kind of growing. The house is surrounded by
We
stuff.
know the owner, we've been in
Okay.
conversation with him. Peter has spent a great deal of time
Okay.
trying to help him be successful.
Just curious. It's weird that I hadn't noticed it, but I just suddenly noticed it. Any other comments from commissioners? Okay, well, thanks everyone for your participation, and we will have our August meeting. Is the August meeting agenda similar to this, light or no?
At this point, yeah.
There's potentially 2 preliminary site plans out there, but they have yet to be turned in. One is for a quick oil stop, and the other is for a project on Remus Road, kind of like an indoor golf recreation kind of building.
Okay. Well, so I guess we'll assume for the time being that we'll have another extended discussion on master plan. So we'll go ahead and adjourn for tonight at 9 o'clock. Okay, we still have a little bit of daylight left, and then look forward to seeing everybody in August.
Daylight.